Tonight, I am asking for your approval of a purchase agreement for property located at 14386 Hudson Road South, Afton, Washington County, Minnesota. This site is 31.41 acres, and it is currently zoned I-1B Industrial by the City of Afton. A 10,268 square foot building has been occupied by Century College Transportation Training Center facility since its construction in 2009. The building is concrete block and steel building constructed with concrete slab on grade floors. The building contains offices, classrooms, restrooms, locker room, laundry room, custodial room with floor sink, utility, fire water room, computer server room, kitchen area, and a garage with 4 bays and 4 overhead doors. And I'd like just to clarify, that would be normal vehicle bays, and so they would translate into 2 bays that would be able to support buses. A second, approximately 832 square foot building is located in the southeast corner of this site. This leased portion of the site is 0.5 acres and includes the building utilized by Media One to house cable, telephone, and data relay equipment. Historical information indicates this site was agricultural land from at least 1938 until it was developed for sand and gravel mining in approximately 1964. Sand and gravel mining operations continued until approximately 1987, when the site was initially developed for commercial use. The first known building constructed on the site was the Media One building in 2000, and the CCTTC, which is the Century College Transportation Facility, was constructed in 2009. The purchase price has met the board parameters from closed session, and so I would ask for your approval at this time.
Okay, could I get a motion and a second to approve the property purchase agreement for the transportation terminal?
So moved.
Okay, and a second?
I'll second.
Okay. Questions and comments?
I have a couple questions.
Yep.
I know we talked about this, but I can't remember. Are we anticipating any transportation increase because we're moving south to the southern end of the district rather than near the central part?
When you say transportation increase, Shelley, are you talking additional time on routes?
Money. Will it cost any more? That's
To run the buses out of there?
Yep.
I don't anticipate having to run additional buses based on the site. We will route coming out of that site.
Okay.
With what that looks like.
And then, did you have more?
No, go ahead.
My second question, is there a change in the tax impact? Or this is money that we already have available to use? So for our taxpayers, will they be responsible for any more than they already are?
No.
Okay.
One thing I'd like to point out, if you delve into the agreement, I noticed it after the fact, after it was in the printer's hands, is there are 2 sections in the agreement. One is Exhibit E, page 3 of 5, and it essentially says who do we send communication to and who do we send copies to. This would mimic page 13. So usually communication would come to my office with a copy going to our attorney. It's highlighted in yellow. It just didn't get transferred to that page when this deal was being worked through with the attorneys. And then Exhibit F, page 1 of 2, there's also a highlighted area that says insert exceptions. There are no exceptions, that will be none, and so that will be removed also.
Mike?
Kristen, several issues that I have with this. I just want to run through those, and if I'm in error, please correct me.
Sure.
And originally, the bus garage was part of the bond issue. And I believe the proposed cost for the bus garage, or the amount set aside, was something like $3.2 million.
3.5 million.
3.5, thank you. And again, the justification was that we were paying roughly about $200,000 a year in lease costs yearly. That was our annual cost. Is that about right?
That is about right. The lease costs have varied since that time. I'd say we're somewhere between $2 and $250. We're about $225 if I had to put a round estimate to it.
Thank you. And again, I was comfortable with those figures because it made sense to me to move toward that amount. It seemed like a reasonable amount of money, and the trade-off seemed somewhat similar to me in the early childhood center when we built that and said, hey, that makes sense. And this amount was actually smaller than the early childhood center. Now, again, going through this agreement, I think the present price for this terminal, land, et cetera, is about 6.85. Is that about right?
That is correct.
And if we were to compare like the lease agreement and how you catch up on that, roughly it would take us 30 years to catch up and you get even point. So I'm saying the increased cost, the length of time to regroup what we'd pay in a lease bothers me a lot, and that's why I'm not going to support this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike, can I ask you a follow-up question? So do you have, we wrangle with this quite a bit, as you know, and I guess I'm just, if you could help me, do you have any other ideas of alternative ideas that we can do? Anything that crossed your mind?
Tell me more.
We've looked at a lot of sites prior to, obviously long prior to Sarah and I being on the board, and had many lengthy discussions. So I guess where I'm at is in weighing the pros and cons and the fact that, this is a duty that we have, per the bond. So I guess I've been trying to find other alternative solutions to the situation at hand. And I personally haven't been able to, find any. So I'm wondering what would be your solution if you're going to vote no?
Yeah. And what I would say is this, like you've said, we've spent a lot of time on this and a lot of meetings on this. And I don't agree with that picture. What I compare it to, and from my frame of reference, was when we were dealing with the issue of the early childhood center. And because they were kind of similar. And as you know, we spent a lot of time looking at alternative sites. Lake Elmo was one of those. And we spent a lot of time. And actually, we got to a point where we were kind of exhausted. Where do you go next? And as I mentioned also, when this came up and became part of the bond issue, it wasn't like this was one of the early priorities. I believe Mr. Hepner mentioned it later and said, well, as long as we're at trying to correct a lot of things, why not attack the bus garage issue? So I guess my perspective is different than yours in terms of the immediacy to make this decision. And I'm saying even the decision to build the early childhood center where it is right now was one that after we'd gone through, because we did turn down a site that environmentally, we like the site, but environmentally it seemed too much of a problem to catch up. And after a lot of minds and continued searching, and might say it came out of nowhere, we picked the junior high site. And there were some adjustments. What I'm saying on this, and price is part of that, I'm saying I think it's too quick to make that decision.
The night we took the vote, for those of us who were on the board at that time, I remember Shelley and I making amendments around sports facilities, but I don't remember there being any conversation around the bus garage. So
I think that's Mike's point, is that he was okay with that price. And maybe had it been 6.85 in the bond, maybe he would have questioned.
Right,
I'm saying this is more than double.
Right, but we didn't, I guess what I'm trying to highlight is that we did not have, I don't think, a identified location at that time. And
Correct.
I think that's when the board should have said, you know what, we know that we have to find a site, and we've been looking at sites now for how many years? It's been an ongoing.
I believe Mr. Bloom started right around the passage of the referendum. If they weren't,
So
I
it'd
would
be
go with the
May
passage.
2015.
May of 15 would be my best estimate.
We've looked at several, to my knowledge, that I've,
Yes, we have explored 15 in attendance area sites, and I believe 3 or 4 that we've looked at that are actually out of District 2.
Kristen, how does that compare to the early childhood? I didn't realize that was a big ordeal because I wasn't on the board then. Is that comparable to what everyone went through with that?
I apologize, I was not in the district at that time. That was Dr.
Or
Queener.
12 sites.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Kristen, if we are to pass on this site, what is financially we're looking at for the district going forward without having this bus garage and holding on to the funds and looking for other sites? What will it cost us financially without the bus garage?
Where I would say immediately the financial impact will come is and you see it in all construction, and we've had the conversation even as it relates to Brookview. The longer we go, the higher construction costs go. And so if we are looking at constructing our own facility, what might have been projected during the review and comment process in 2015, that information then is 3 years out of date, and what has happened to construction costs. That's first and foremost what comes to mind. Typically things don't get less expensive. And same with land, quite honestly. That's first and foremost. We had talked in closed session about potential negative ramifications as far as the financing goes. From what I can see, we're not necessarily going to expose ourselves to that. I would continue to work through that. So I think we might be okay in that area. To me, it comes down to construct a building even in 16 is going to look different in 16 than in 18.
How about with our lease of space and all of that?
So where we run into lease of space, and we have extended that until April 1st of 18, and I think we could probably get it until summer if we needed it. That land, to the best of my knowledge, is either for sale or will be put for sale, which then means that we would not have that opportunity to lease there anymore, and I am not familiar with a site that would be able to accommodate us in a leasing capacity, if not that site.
So we'd have to lease again, and I don't see lease rates going down. They would probably go up.
Yeah.
So can you just clarify what you just said? I'm sorry, I think I misunderstood. Were you talking about the site that we're currently using?
As it relates to what?
Well,
Just talking about the
answering
leases?
Tom's question, we're leasing the site that we're at right now?
Yes.
Are you saying you're not clear if that piece of land is actually for sale?
I am saying that we have had discussions internally. I do not know if it's listed.
Oh, okay. So what was the original driving force behind this decision then, other than, as Mike mentioned, George had the suggestion that we consider a new location? Is there some other reason why we're needing to do this now?
It's not a big enough facility as it is. So when we discussed what goes into the bond, that was one of the suggestions actually Mr. Bloom brought forward before I did, and I just concurred with it. Here's what scares me. I took a look and I learned something about the current site that we're on. NSP owned the 5-acre property between 1965 and 1978 when it was sold to Jim Junker of Junker Sanitation. In 1984, MPCA notified NSP that a number of drums were located at the site. Junker subsequently donated the property to the Trinity Lutheran Church in 1987. In 1988, NSP sponsored a survey which visually located 14 drums. Pollution Control Agency requested NSP remove the drums or face Superfund activity at that site. That was May of 1994. Upon excavation, each drum was inspected to determine its structural integrity, weight, and the status of its seal. On November 10, 1994, 16 drums were excavated or otherwise collected at the site. 15 of the drums were found to be empty or contained small amounts of sand or water. Each of the 15 drums was missing a seal, or was sufficiently corroded so it would not provide containment. In August of 1995, so about a year later, Pollution Control Agency did a study of the land that's there. In order to conduct this is from their executive summary, in order to conduct a quantitative risk assessment, the estimated exposure concentrations, soil concentrations to which receptors will be exposed, should represent a conservative estimate of the average exposure concentration. Their evaluation was based on potential toxic effects resulting from the exposure to chemicals of concern. The results of the assessment indicated that the estimated total excess cancer risk, based on the individual soil sample concentrations, exceeded the acceptable target cancer risk level at numerous locations within the site boundaries for both unrestricted and recreational land use. Should be noted that the concentrations posing greater than, and this is where it gets into way more chemistry than I know, concentrations posing greater than excess cancer risk for unrestricted land use would probably also pose an unacceptable excess cancer risk for a chronically exposed industrial worker. Soil concentrations posing greater than a 1 times 10 to the third power excess cancer risk for unrestricted use may also pose an excess risk for individuals exposed for only a relatively brief period of time. The non-carcinogenic evaluation suggested there are 6 sampling locations within the site boundaries that contain contaminants at concentrations that are of potential health concern. When I read that, and it's of course part of a much longer thing that Oak Park Heights has available, but my thought on reading that was, how do we get out of there as quickly as possible? And so I took a look at the finances, and you used 30 years times 200,000, I think, for part of. Here's the way I went at it. What did we commit to a new bus garage? We committed 3.5. Mm-hmm. We sold New Heights for 1.3. Now, that'll be used for something. So in my thinking, well, let's take the 1.3 for the bus garage. That gets us to 4.8. Then if we're leasing for 10 years, I use the figure $200,000, that picks up the other $2 million, and that gets me to my $6.8 million. Now, I'm taking lease costs, I'm taking what the bond committed, and I'm taking New Heights charge. But I get to a 6.8, and I'm satisfied that we're moving into a facility that's much better for our employees, not only health-wise, but just a much better facility. I think because of the bays, mechanic bays that are already there, it's a better facility for the mechanics to work on buses. We know there are classrooms there that they don't have at the current site.
Correct.
So that was my thinking, and the reason I will vote for it. I mean, all of that combined is kind of why I'm saying I think we've looked at sites. We can't seem to find anything. When we do find what we consider to be a good site, some entity says, no, we don't want you here. Perfectly logical. I can understand a lot of folks doing that. But I'm satisfied that we can afford this site, and it's a better site for our buses and our workers.
One thing that I would like to add, and it's a financing piece that actually came across when we were renegotiating or negotiating the contract with Minnesota Central, is we had their busing prices, but we also entered into an agreement, and we actually need property to do that, of which they would pay, or a busing company would pay, leasing costs to us. And so, yes, right now we pay that, let's say, $200,000, $225,000 for that lease space, of which Minnesota Central they pay for that. So ultimately, let's just say it's zero to us. We pay no cost for that leasing space. The difference is once we own a space, we're now collecting that money annually, at least according to the agreement with Minnesota Central, into our system. So I don't know if that changes anybody's thinking, but another way is we go from, let's say, paying no leasing costs because they're contributing to receiving revenue to help offset the costs of maintenance of the building, debt of the building, and we wouldn't be taking out a debt payment, but it offsets our costs down the road. So then how many years can we lease that building and actually recover whatever we've invested into it? Just another way to look at it.
And what I've heard is, I'm sorry.
It's okay. Well, I was just going to say, that actually raises one of my questions is, do we have any estimated operational costs for managing this building? And who would cover that? I mean,
again, the leasing revenue that we would receive would cover that, and then whatever the net gain is above that. So I want to say the agreement entered into with Min Central was close to $200,000. If it costs $40,000-$50,000 to, and in that agreement, there's nuances of which they pay certain fees and we pay certain fees, and in addition to the rent payment, whatever the net gain is, honestly, it's no different than what we had with Washington School. There's expenses that go into running it, and you have a gross amount, you have a net amount, and so we could realistically net $100,000 to $150,000 a year. Right. I think that's very realistic to say. I don't have all of the utility records and what it costs, and our purposes would be very different than what it was used for.
So it won't make as big of an impact. I had in my mind all the way along that it would save us $200,000 a year in the general fund, but that's not it's probably too high a number that I'm thinking.
But it's just reversed. Again, it's not necessarily saving us the general fund, we're just now collecting revenue. It's not yes.
See, again, the part I look at this is I'm not opposed to keep looking. Obviously, even the fact that we're talking about this tonight probably will get some publicity, and hopefully what's going to happen, if I prevail, is that somebody's going to say, I got this wonderful piece of land at a wonderful price, and they're going to come forward. That may or may not happen. I'm saying where I disagree a little bit with Jennifer is, as these things go, I don't think we've been on it that long. I think the fact that you mentioned that the present owners of what we're using now are going to put theirs on the market, I think it's going to be harder to sell after what George read. But I hope that doesn't happen for the owners, but I'm saying that's the case. Again, you keep looking and finding, but I'm saying I'm also bothered because back in 2015 in that May, 3.5 looked a lot better to me. Yeah. And I think this is a much bigger step. That's what I have trouble with. We'll wait and see what the rest of the board decides.
And I'd like to say it's a lot of money, and it's a concern, and I think I do think we've been talking about it, and I've been personally wrangling with this for quite some time. Isn't there a time limit with which we have to make a decision for what we said we're going to do in the bond? Is it a 3 year or 5?
And we had talked about the negative arbitrage effect of not spending the money within 3 years, and that is what I had mentioned with Tom about what are the financing impacts. Okay. The thing is, we did have, and again, it's the nuance of the finances, we did have the sale of a building in that. So are we using bond proceeds, or are we using the sale of Valley Crossing? Because the sale of Valley Crossing doesn't enter into the negative arbitrage conversation. I'm not entirely certain yet if we have that ability to make that distinction. I am researching that. As far as, do we have only 3 years to spend it right now to err on the side of where I believe the answer will come in? I would say no. I believe we have longer than that.
And can you speak a little bit to you've looked at many sites, and maybe speak for the sake of the public, what type of process that was?
Sure. And I'll stick to, if you will, I will stick to the properties that lie within district, because those ones, just given proximity to what even Shelley had mentioned, what does it cost to run buses from any particular location? I would say of the 15 that we explored, proximity was a consideration. Areas that seem to be challenging for us, quite honestly, was zoning. There is not a lot of zoned industrial property, and the two properties that we were discussing before, one we had actually entered into a purchase agreement on, and the second we were working with a property off of Stagecoach, we ran into zoning issues due to the various municipalities that we were dealing with. And so zoning seemed to be a very large piece of it. Where we were zoned appropriately or thought we even had the potential to be zoned appropriately, then there might have been other caveats. That property was being leased by someone else and they had the right of first refusal. Size of the property is a consideration. We have, and honestly, the restrictions that the municipalities provides as far as pervious surfaces that are allowed, because then that determines the acreage you have to buy, and is that acreage available to us? Can we get all of the employees' cars and the buses? Those were a lot of the conversations that were had as it relates to those properties. Then it came down to, it was even conversations about Central Stillwater, and you have a stream of properties. Can we make it work? There was one actually right next to Central Services. How nice would that be to just take over and do that? Well, then you have access points. You're dealing with road restrictions and stoplights and all of the things that Washington County and the safety care about. And is that even feasible? Let alone the size of the building. Can we get the wash bays on, or the mechanics bays? All of those things seem to be explored. And quite honestly, there were a few properties where there was land, their location was great. We don't believe we'd run into any municipality decision, and they just quite frankly weren't willing to sell to us.
Yeah, and here's where, with the ECFE building, because I know that was a huge, that was a challenging time too. Where I'm at is, I just don't see that there are a lot of options, and the zoning that's a true reality that you have to face. And so just to drill you ever so much more, a little bit more. So how long have you been looking at various sites? Years, how many?
Well, again, it started with Mr. Bloom, and the torch was handed to me upon his retirement. So
okay,
we are 2+ years in, 2 real estate brokers in.
Okay.
So we've had even different lenses coming from brokers.
Okay, thank you.
So I would say I'm less decided than I was when I came in, just because I don't want to be on our current site. I feel like it's like a hot potato that we need to be off. I'm concerned about the price. I'm not sure what the best thing is. And now that we know that maybe we have longer than that 3 years, does that change things? Is there anything out there? That's the whole thing we don't know, right? Whether there's something out there. And it's a great piece of property. I just don't know. Do you know when we picked that $3.5 million? Was it an arbitrary number, or did we think we could build on a site? Do you remember? Or do you know?
I was not a part of the process.
The only thing I would say, and George and Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Dennis was initially very, very optimistic that it was covered. And quite honestly, George, and I mean that as a compliment, I think even when you proposed the idea, I thought it was a very good one. It made good sense compared to what else was in the bond issue. It made sense. The escalating price bothers me, and some of those. And again, I know it's a lot of work on your part in contacting realtors, but in my simple mind, it seems like a relatively short time. So,
and again, the amount of work it takes that doesn't matter. It is taxpayer dollars, and it does not matter. I just don't. The properties that I've seen, and honestly, even exploring properties that we currently possess, I don't see an extreme amount of variation if there is any ability to do.
Kristen, would you clarify, because I think some of our audience took your comment as taxpayer dollars, it does not matter, maybe in the wrong way. I think your intention was different than that?
Correct. I will take as much time as absolutely humanly necessary to make sure the best deal for our public and our taxpayers.
Thank you.
Well, and I think that it's a different conversation if the vote was before us and we had only maybe explored 2 or 3 or even a half a dozen sites. But when I hear that there's 15 sites that we've explored in terms of being what's a good fit for the district, in 24 months, that's, every month and a half that we're looking at something that simply has not, flushed out. And I think that I wish I was as optimistic as Mike that someone might call us and say, I've got this amazing property that's going to fit your needs. I think that, and we've had hours of closed session discussion about this, that the due diligence has been done about the viable options that currently exist. And I think that the $3.5 million, while that might have been what was projected, I think that the board at the time, myself included, maybe then should have taken into account that since we didn't have an identified property, that was a risk that we were exposing ourselves to, and that's on, I'll own that for my part of the vote. So I think that given what is before us now and the information that we have before us in terms of what is first and foremost and best for our employees, and that's a huge consideration for me. And so I don't think you can quantify that. And so I do support this. I feel that we have been doing this study, this work, and examining that this really is the best fit for the needs of the district based on the information that we have in front of us today.
I think for me, this is a question of our priorities. We have a voter-approved amount of money to spend on a bus transportation facility of $3.5 million. I can see that might not have been quite enough. Maybe we under-projected what the actual cost would be. But to go to almost double that seems really irresponsible. I mean, we had a very fruitful discussion at our very last meeting to decide whether or not we were going to spend $500,000 on OPEB. And we decided we were going to be respectful of the taxpayers' dollars and not ask for that. And now we're essentially choosing to spend, almost $3.5 million more than what they said they were okay with us spending without asking. And that money is building money. That's capital that can be used that's money that could be used for other facilities, such as an addition to Lake Elmo. We could add on to Valley Crossing if we needed. We would have that money sitting there for any contingencies that we might see in the near future instead of spending it on this extraordinarily expensive piece of land. Now, in looking at this piece of land, I agree. It's beautiful. It's spectacular. It's it's easy access. In a lot of ways, it's a beautiful building. It's brand new. I mean, I can see the appeal of that. But I would love to live in a $5 million house too, and I'm not going to go buy that because I can't afford that. So at some point, we have to decide what are our priorities, what do we value, and are we really going to sit here and spend almost $7 million of the taxpayers' money when we know very well we could hand back that 3.5 if we wanted to. Or we could save it and make an addition or put it towards another building, which we may very well need in the very near future, because I think all of us know that most every single one of our buildings is quite full right now.
Sarah, just a correction, and I apologize if I misunderstood you. We cannot use the 3.5 for additions to our other buildings. The bond language specifically stated it was to be used for a bus garage and that it would be a material change.
But I thought you just said that we could consider the
I said I was looking into that option.
Well, okay.
And we don't want to add on to Valley Crossing because we don't own it anymore.
No, I think she meant Brookview.
Oh,
I meant
okay.
Brookview.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I did misspeak. I meant Brookview.
And Sarah, I absolutely,
Would the audience please be quiet? We're trying to have our board meeting. Go ahead.
I absolutely agree with you, Sarah, in terms of being very judicious in terms of looking at the priorities and what we're spending the money on. Absolutely. What I'm struggling with is the conundrum of what other options might exist out there. And if the board ultimately decides not to invest and go with the bus garage, then what other alternatives do we have?
I agree with you. I think it does seem like there has been a tremendous amount of time and effort and work put into this, and I really do respect that. And it does seem like we are in a really tough spot. This site obviously has some challenges. I guess I just feel like there's reason to believe that we could take some more time, and there's no reason why we have to leave this site at this moment. I think that we could, respect the community and respect the community's dollars by giving it a little bit more time and continuing to see if there isn't a better choice.
I think, though, if you want to respect the community's dollars, you give it back to them. You say, look, we can't find a spot. Why hold on to $3.5 million? That's the taxpayers.
I agree.
That's the point. So you can't say, well, let's go find another spot. We've looked for another spot. They've looked for another spot. Either the communities that we thought would want it have said no. There's a huge distinction between an early childhood family center school and a bus garage. People don't want buses firing up in the morning, and I can understand that. I wouldn't want it either. So you're left with this decision of either, you say you don't want to spend money for $6 million for a bus garage, and you give back the money to the taxpayers. It's their money. It's not our money. We give it back. Or you say, you know what, we're trying to save $200,000 out of the budget, which is going to go up every year because we're always, we have other things we always want to spend money on, whether it's class size, whether it's special programs. Here's a way to do it. It's going to cost you $6 million. Again, we got $1. You can spend it here. You can spend it there. I don't know what to do, but I'm not going to sit here and say there's another site out there because there isn't another site out there. We've looked. People have said no. We've gone to community meetings. They've all said no. This was probably the last best chance. If this doesn't work, I'm saying give it back to the taxpayers.
Yeah, Tom, I'm comfortable, and I've seen it done where districts have turned money back to the taxpayers. There is a value to that. It does build a tremendous amount of credibility, and I've seen it, and I've seen that done. The difference, I would say, is this, and again, I've been accused other times of being over optimistic, and I can live with that. I wouldn't rush out tomorrow. Like I said, even the fact I think that we're talking about this publicly, I did not think that we would end up at the junior high site, but it was. All of a sudden it was there, and somebody said, wow, this is a great idea, and I think that was Dr. Queener, and I give him credit for it. Again, off the top of my head, I don't have an alternative like that. Somebody in the community may, or there might be other ideas, so I'm saying first, I don't think this is something that has to be decided tonight. On the other hand, if we get to the point where we don't, I'm very comfortable with giving that money back to the taxpayers. It's their money.
And absolutely, I don't disagree with anything that either you or Sarah or anyone has said about the money, absolutely. And I feel that morally, now that we have information that we might not have had before, are we going to prioritize jeopardizing our employees' well-being and health? So I think that discussion should be on the table. And I'm not comfortable saying that just because it's a smaller amount of people that would be affected, that I think that we also have an ethical and moral obligation to look at that and enter that into the conversation in terms of how we decide going forward, because people's health is something that I don't feel like you can put a price tag on or quantify in a financial sense.
Which I guess I haven't felt like anybody has been trying to do. I think it's more about, do we do it now, or do we try to look further? I think for me, the biggest rub from the very first time we've met has always been the extra money and where that comes from. Should it be spent on one of our school buildings, which will help student learning? I think that's always been my struggle. Does Lake Elmo need, we know that it needs help in that building because there's so many additions. You know, is there a better way to spend the extra money than on a bus garage? I think that's where my greatest struggle has been, because I would love to say, yes, we need this bus garage. Is it our number one priority? I think that's what we have to decide.
Yes, I agree. I mean, when we had high school teachers coming to us asking for some adjustments to the building construction project, they were told that there wasn't any money to add additional walls or make any adjustments or flexibility in the space. When the parents from Lake Elmo came and said that they need more special ed appropriate playground equipment in their building, they were told to try to get together with their PTA and come up with the money, and they were told there isn't money right now. They've been put off and put off and put off. When the gate parents get moved to the junior high, to Stillwater Middle School, they still haven't been told for sure if there's going to be a playground or not. I don't know if there's going to be a playground or not, but I don't think a playground costs nearly as much as this. I think there are lots of things that people have been told, no, there's not money for, and if there's all of a sudden $3.3 million sitting here that we can go buy this piece of land, I'm absolutely shocked. I think that we should not, I do not approve of this plan. I think that we should stay exactly where we are and continue to use the spot that the bus barn is now. I think it's working fine. Are there issues? Yes. They should be addressed as much as we can, and perhaps we keep looking, I don't know, but I think Tom is exactly right. I think we should proceed to giving this money back to the community.
Are we?
$3.5 million should go back to the community.
I was just going to ask is there any value in tabling it, or do we want to just have a decision tonight either way?
I want to have a decision tonight either way. I mean, we're here, let's have the decision. That's our job. You vote how you believe it should go, and you let the chips fall where they may, and you move forward.
I would support tabling. I'm just very uncomfortable that we are having the information. If I'm understanding it right, I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to at all interpret that I'm able to read and synthesize what you read, George. But I'm very uncomfortable, based on what I thought I heard, that we are going to continue knowingly have employees on a site that could not be in the best interest of their health.
Well, and can you go back over that? Because I felt like it, and I don't want them there, but was it excessive time spent in an industrial type job? Do you remember?
Well, now keep in mind, this is 1995, and what I found out in reading was it was never used as a dump. It was used as a mechanics lot. So there was, what Eric Johnson at Oak Park told me was there was antifreeze in the ground, there was oil in the ground. That's what it was used for. When they had the argument about continuing the Stefan lease there, and Mayor Bodette was Oak Park mayor at the time, he argued because of the soil and the groundwater going into that pond that's behind there. But here's and again, I'm picking lines out of a fairly lengthy report. The results of the assessment indicated that the estimated total excess cancer risk based on the individual soil sample concentrations exceeded the acceptable target cancer risk level at numerous locations within the site boundaries for both unrestricted and recreational land use. That's the first sentence in a paragraph, generally would be your theme sentence. At the end of this thing, at the end of the same paragraph, it should be noted that the concentrations posing greater than a 1 times 10 to the 4th excess cancer risk for unrestricted land use would probably also pose an unacceptable excess cancer risk for a chronically exposed industrial worker. Soil concentrations posing greater than a 1 times 10 to the 3rd excess cancer risk for unrestricted use may also pose an excess risk for individuals exposed for only a relatively brief period of time. Again, I'm picking two lines out of, and I don't remember how long the report was. I didn't bring the whole thing tonight, but though I read those lines and I got scared, just frankly, yeah.
Well, and again, what's the date on that, George?
That was August of 1995. That's when the study
Yeah,
was done.
I'm saying it's a little overdue in terms of addressing the situation.
Well, you know why I addressed it at this time.
Sure,
though. I wanted-
but the point that I'm feeling is, like Sarah said, I think it needs to be addressed if it's a safety hazard. Suppose the motion carries tonight. Are we going to be in there when school starts? Is that where the buses are going to come out of? Is the new setting?
No. There would need to be the remediation. That's part of the agreement with the asphalt and the lighting and the block heaters. I would anticipate that we would not be in that building until spring.
Which would mean that regardless, those workers there would be exposed. And so what would seem prudent to do at this point is to have somebody who's qualified, whoever does that sort of thing, go in, whether you call in OSHA or whatever, and you say, is there a risk of workers, and what is that risk?
So that would lead to the suggestion of tabling it and asking for an updated study, because I would support that as well.
Yes, because I'm
the
saying
1995
regardless,
study-
whether it's 6 months or a year or a day, we want to make sure, as several of you have done, and I think that's fair, is to say, let's make sure it's a safe environment.
Do we have to
And
vote on this motion?
if that's your main reason for voting for or against this, that makes sense. If that's not your main reason, then it doesn't make as much sense.
Well, I'll be on, I'll tell you
Clue
what,
me in.
for
Well,
me,
if it's money, if it's finances,
Oh,
that the
okay.
main argument is, then no matter what this says, doesn't make any difference. If it's, yeah, it is appropriate to spend that money, or no, I don't want to spend that money, what I read makes no difference then.
But regardless, what I'm saying, depending on how this motion goes tonight,
Yep.
if you're going to continue to use this site and our workers are exposed.
Right, I understand that, and I think it's maybe different than what the issue is that's on the table right now.
Agree.
It's a different.
But I'm saying, I'm like Sarah, I think it's got to be addressed.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt.
But there's a difference between, I think, in expediting it versus saying, we're going to hold off indefinitely, and, you know, employees, if you're there another 6 months or another 6 years, we just need to wait for the perfect site.
Yeah, and I
So
don't-
think that we need to be really deliberate and really clear and transparent about what are we willing to prioritize more. And what's really at the crux. We're doing a really good job about dancing around the issue here, but I think we have to just really call it out and say, I am not comfortable having any person in an environment that could put them in jeopardy of their health. And so I think that if it means then we can get them in a different location sooner, then that is what I'm going to prioritize.
could I make a motion to table this until we have, yes, the finances are very bothersome to me. The price is very bothersome, but could I make a motion to table until we have an updated study? The study that we've been working off of is 20 years old. And I don't know what kind of length of time that would entail, but I don't feel comfortable voting on this tonight.
I second that.
Any discussion on the motion to table?
I do have a quick question. I think in our closed session in discussing this situation, there was a Phase 1 study done on this property, and I don't remember it being that old. Is that the one that George is referencing now? We're talking about two different studies, or is that one in the same with the one that you presented to us earlier?
I don't know George's material. I know that there was a Phase 1 that was done by the owner. I don't recall the year being 95. I want to say it was 97,
Okay.
but it might have been a little bit later than that. So this would require our, and again, so you know, and so you can provide direction should you go that way. Are you asking me to have our environmental company do a phase 1, a phase 2? My guess is that's going to take months. Phase 1 is essentially the materials available and interviewing, and then phase 2 is actually digging in the ground and processing that information. And we will be using dollars. I mean, again, ballpark of 10 to 30 might be the cost of
And those would be capital funds, right? Just to be clear.
We're not purchasing the property.
It's like something that would fall under a long-term facilities type situation, or it's not talking about operational funds, right?
Yes.
Well, here's the problem. One, we don't own the property.
We don't own the property.
So you're not going to be able to say to ABC owner, hi, we're coming in and we're going to do a phase 1 or phase 2 on your property. Second of all, I'm not going to support that. I'm not going to incur that expense for this. You know, I'm comfortable tabling it to get more information, but I'm not going to do any more research on that property at this point.
So I agree with you, Tom, because it's not our property.
Okay, so
We're
that,
leasing
okay,
it.
so I understand that, but so what kind of research would you be looking for?
I guess I'll take a look. I mean, I understand what George is reading from. I'm not sure if, as a result of what the MPCA said, someone didn't go out and remediate the site or do what. I think that's kind of what the phase 1 would tell me as to what the condition is right now. I don't know what the date is, but it's troublesome what happened back in the 80s or 90s. Not sure if that still is the condition now. Maybe the owner remediated some of these issues and we don't have that problem anymore. But the bottom line for me is I'm not interested in continuing to look for other sites. I feel that we have looked and looked and looked. So if this site doesn't go forward at some point, may not, I've said I want to give the money back to the taxpayers. That's just where I'm at with this. So, but I'm comfortable tabling it so that everyone else can get further information on that and we can make a decision. I don't know if Scanel will even keep the offer open at that point. That's the other risk we run, is they're going to say, you know, we'll look at other people, but that's just the nature of the beast when you have a public body buying something. So
yeah.
I'd like to just take a vote on tabling it and see where we're at.
You going to call that question?
I guess the question would be, you know, I understand tabling it is a good idea. It gives us a little bit more time, but to do what? Like, at what point do we bring it back up again? What do we, I mean, at some point, Kristen needs to have direction from us on what to do.
Well, my understanding with tabling is to be able to look at our present property to make sure if, not our present property, but where we're leasing, to see if it's as bad as that report says and how quickly we need to get our people off of there.
Well, for me, tabling it, what it means is someone needs more information. Whether that information is out there or is going to help them make a decision at some point in the future, it seems pretty personal as to what one person may need versus the other. I'm not interested in tabling this very long. I would think we'd want it to come back up at the next board meeting. Or deny the table and let's vote tonight.
Yeah, but one thing I think we want to know, and I understand the arguments, it's not our property, but they are our employees. And so whatever it takes.
They aren't our employees.
Well,
It's a contract.
I hear you.
right?
They drive our kids though, so.
But I know, but the study goes into our decision-making process. So for me, if it doesn't matter, it shouldn't matter. To me, it matters. It does matter. And if we're looking at a 20-year-old study to try to make a decision on the current parcel of land that we're using, I think it matters. So we either want to believe a 20-year-old study or we don't care about it. But I do think it matters. I think it has to weigh into this decision. So.
And
I would like to
Jennifer,
know
I
what
agree,
I-
but what I want to know, Tom held out the possibility, and I think it's quite possible that the present owner or that something was done to make it safe. The study didn't go away, but
I think
what we
that's part
don't
of-
know.
yeah, part of the point that.
Well, we don't know that.
So we need more information on the current condition of this property, not based on information that's coming from 1995. So that's one thing we could try to do. And I would like to know what the bus company thinks about all of this. Do they have an opinion? You know, do they have thoughts? Do they know about all of this? Are they willing to take that risk themselves? I don't understand. I don't know anything about where they're at.
Kristen, and again, I don't want you to do that now, but a question I would have too is even if he's going to put the property on the market, those are concerns anybody's going to have.
Yeah.
We've got a motion on the floor to table, so without any further comment or questions, all those in favor of tabling, and I guess you still don't know what we want you to do with it, but we're tabling
the motion to sell the property is basically what we've tabled.
To the September board meeting or?
to the September board meeting.
Makes sense.
And we'll
to
get
me.
whatever information we can between now and September, is that?
Yeah.
I would also-
like some information.
Yeah, I would also like to encourage the community to weigh in on this.
Yeah. Well, I
If they
think,
have thoughts.
yeah, I think one thing you could do, and without commissioning a study, because it's not our land, is talk to the owner and let them respond. Because that's pretty serious stuff that's been quoted tonight, and perhaps they dealt with it. And that's a missing piece we haven't gotten.
And the rationale for me requesting the table is that we're working off, that matters to me, that information matters to me. It's old information, and if there's a possibility that we could buy this parcel at a much lower price point, and if it is a safe piece of property, then that would possibly be more prudent for us. But again, I don't feel that we know that right now, and that's why I am requesting the table.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you want Kristen to do between now and, say, the September meeting?
I don't know that I want to give you some specific parameters on a time. Do you feel that you could get us some updated information on that property so we can make a more educated decision on this in a short amount of time? Do you have any?
If we are not commissioning a study, it comes down to research of the information that's available. And if what George has read in whatever I had provided in the email about when the phase 1 was done, if that is the most recent, that's all I will have available to me, other than talking to the property owner to see if any work was done. In absence, can I do that by the September meeting? I most certainly can get my hands on either a study that was done since and talk to the property owner if one exists. But beyond that, if we're looking to commission, which I believe I'm hearing we're not interested in that couldn't be done by September.
I'm comfortable with what you just said.
Yeah.
So am I.
Okay.
Okay, all those in favor of tabling to the September meeting with what you just heard, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Nay.
Look at you loner.
It's been a long time, hasn't it?
Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen.
All right, I
Thank you.
think we've got
School board membership.
school board memberships, and I'm believing we're looking at 3 memberships. We have the Minnesota School Board Association. Looks like that one's going up about $220. We have the Minnesota State High School League membership. There is no fee for that membership, but board action is required. And we have AMSD, which looks like it's going down about $70 or so. I would make a motion to approve the district memberships for 2017, 2018. Could I get a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? All those in favor?
Wait, there's a hand
Yep.
up over here.
Yep.
I would like to amend the motion. I support all of those organizations that we're in. What I would like to amend the motion to do is to take a look and investigate C membership. C stands for Schools for Equity in Education. It's an organization that we belong to for a very long time, years, and I'm quite familiar with it, and I think several board members are as well. And in terms of cost and offerings and what's available, and I don't think an investigation would take very long, and we could gather some pros, cons, and have that ready by the September meeting as well. And I'm quite willing to investigate, or if others want to do that.
Mike, are you thinking that this would be in addition to our
Correct.
current memberships?
Yes.
And how would this be an additional benefit above and beyond the three that we already?
What C does, basically, the organization, their main mission is the difference, not so much in students. They're concerned about that in terms of equity among students, but they're also concerned about certain districts are in a more advantageous in terms of state funding than others. So that's been one